All right, so everyone is talking about heat stress right now. It's extremely warm, and some places are very dry. Some places are getting too much water. There's kind of a recipe there for hot, humid weather for our cool season grass. So today I thought I would have a discussion here with my good friend Ryan, and he's not been on the channel before, but I talk to him all the time, and we are going back and forth on a lot of things. So today I wanted to bring him on, finally introduce him to everyone, because basically he's my, I would say, mentor for cool season grass at this point, and helps me just a ton with everything. So thank you, Ryan, for joining today.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate that, Ryan. And yeah, it's, we've talked off and on for a long time, I think, about a variety of different topics. And it, the thing that always comes back to it ebbs and flows with the weather, right? I think that's usually kind of our conversation starter every time. And so here we are across the Midwest. And, for most of us, I think it's been hot and dry. Here where I'm at in Ohio, pretty much through the Midwest. I think Indiana's had a little bit more rain, but out towards you, I haven't followed too closely. I know it's been hot, but what's it been like out there for you?
Yeah, so it's kind of been, western side seems like they're in the actual drought now, just into where I am, and then even part of Des Moines, like 5 miles east of me, got a couple inches of rain the other day, and I got 2/10 total. So it's just, how it is.
Well, it's not enough. Not enough when you do need it, and always too much when you don't. So that's the way it goes.
Exactly. So that's we could talk a little bit about that too, how there are some different things. Sometimes it's not so terrible to be a little bit more on the dry side if it's 78 degrees overnight too, but Yeah,
and that's a big thing too. I think we can talk about, moisture management is such a critical part of, we talk about heat stress, and that's a variety of different things. I mean, there's temperature stress, there's also known as heat stress. There's light stress, where we've got, the sun is about as high in the sky as it's going to be, and has been here for the last month or so, and that contributes a little bit to that. So when you put all those things together and then you don't have your moisture right, I mean, that is a recipe for not necessarily a disaster, but a slow decline, and it's a common thing that we see in all turf stands, from anywhere from golf course putting greens to sports fields and home lawns, that summer decline is a real thing on all turf. And we can talk a little bit about the why today, of why that's important, and also too to kind of reiterate some of the things I've told you privately in the past is, this isn't something you can spread or spray your way out of. This is part where you've got to manage your your agronomics, your cultural practices, your watering, all those little things to get you through this period. And we can talk about how sort of some of that goes here today.
Okay. And before we get ahead of ourselves, one thing I wanted to do was give a little bit, if you can give a little background on what you do, your sort of background with turf and that stuff, just to give the audience a little idea of how long you've been doing this and what you're up to all the time.
Yeah, so I've been in turf now for 24 years. So I started off at a very small mom and pop golf course, weed eating, line trimming, whatever you want to call it, around trees, and kind of worked my way up and decided that I wanted to explore this as a career. I went to Ohio State and got a couple of degrees in turfgrass management and agribusiness. Ended up working on a golf course for a total of 16 years, and ended up as a head superintendent at a private club here in Columbus, Ohio, and loved every minute of it. I loved golf, and it provided me a ton of opportunities to learn and grow with agronomic stuff, with construction projects, improvement projects, all sorts of different things that I would have never dreamed possible when I was out filling up 2-cycle gas cans and weed eating trees when I was 14 years old. So fast forward to about 7 years ago, 2013, I was kind of ready for a little bit of a change of pace, and a position came open in managing sports turf for a large municipality around me, and I took that and kind of took that as a challenge to learn a different side of the business. There's a lot of similarities, much more than most people would think, between golf courses and sports fields and stuff, but I really took that as a personal challenge to learn and grow and try to get a little bit better at something different other than golf. And so in that 7 years, I've seen a lot of things, been through a ton of different, construction projects, improvement projects, and managing, well over 300 acres of cool season turf at a variety of different management levels. So, I've gotten to see, sort of the levels of expectations change and how to adapt to those, both from a cost standpoint, but also too of, how to pull those different levels or levers, of, again, irrigation management, disease management, fertility, all those different things that really go into managing a turf system well. And again, just not relying on products and saying, hey, I'm going to spray this or do that and it's going to fix everything. Like, it just doesn't work like that. So here in the last couple of years, gotten involved and started my own business as far as consulting and doing stuff for sports fields and other business entities that are involved in sports fields and stuff like that, construction, renovation, where I help school districts, parks, all that sort of stuff with both establishing a program for an existing field, helping them develop construction specifications, all that sort of stuff for new fields or renovations, things like that. So again, it's been a really, really fun ride, and I enjoy it. But the last thing I'll say here is that this little community that's been built on YouTube and the Lawn Forum is a really, really cool space. It's nice to see that people are so eager to learn, and that's kind of the reason I think I've gravitated towards you and your channel, is just because I think you're trying to help people understand one, the why, which is really, really important, more so than just what do I need to do and how do I need to do it in the quickest and most expedient way. But also too that I think there's I can see a genuine desire for you to go through that struggle and help people go through it themselves. So I appreciate that about you, and glad we had a chance to chat today. So let's,
that's awesome.
So let's talk turf though.
Get
That's
into
enough about
it.
me.
Yeah, let's. So just one little thing though, if you do happen to watch Matt Martin's or watch his live stream or also listen to his radio show, a lot of times he's talking on there. Oh, Ryan said this. Ryan said this. It's not me, folks. It's this Ryan he's talking about, the AKA Sports Turf King. That Matt
I did not name myself that. I did not name myself that. Matt has bestowed that upon me. So we'll give him full credit for that. It's bad luck to give yourself a nickname, so I did not do that.
Exactly. Yep. So let's talk about some of these sort of limits that we're experiencing with heat and a lot of things going on, especially across the Midwest, the Northeast. All of that I think is pretty much in the same boat right now. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so, I think what people always go to first off is the textbook definition of what are these optimum levels of temperature, both air and soil, for cool season turf. And, the textbook definition for air temperature is 60 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The ideal textbook temperature for soil is 50 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, we're well beyond those optimum temperatures at this point, obviously. And so we'll provide a little bit of a snapshot here in a minute of what that means visually. But you sent me a message just the other day. I think you had a soil temperature reading in your front yard of like almost 90 degrees. You're pretty much right at 90. Is that right?
Yeah, it was right at 90.
Yeah,
yep.
that is insane. And that's not atypical for summertime especially, but it's something where there's nothing you can do to manage around that, right? You're not going to go out there and drop 50-pound bags of ice across your turf.
Which I did ask you about.
You did. That was a clever drop in right there to see if you pick up on that. But yeah, so that is not cost effective, both of your time and your money. So there's not a lot you can do there. So it's about preserving and playing defense to a certain extent to get through that. And so, really quick, I'll share my screen here, and if you want to throw this up on the video, I'll make sure that you have access to it. But, so this is kind of what we call our cool season growth chart. And, you've got the months here along the bottom axis here, and then we can kind of see shoots up here in this area here. Let me see if I can get my laser pointer. But in any regard, going through springtime, you can see a growth surge of top growth of leaf tissue, right? And we're also building roots at that time. This one over-exaggerates it maybe just a little bit on the spring root development, but it is a really crucial period. What we have and take out of winter, generally speaking, we're going to have coming into spring and be able to build off of those. We're going to lose a little bit of carbohydrates in that spring flush, and then we kind of go into summer. So we're right in that, obviously, middle of July, and you can see we are in the peak of this, what they call summer decline. This is, again, characterized in all kinds of text, research papers, textbooks, everything like that, that it's noted on every, cool season turf type around the world. It's just what happens. So don't feel like it's just you. Don't look across the street and be like, well, how come, my yard looks worse than somebody else's? In a lot of cases, this is prep work that starts, in the previous fall and goes on through summer. And that's the way I like to look at it too, is that, your growing season for turf truly starts right about the renovation period. So even if you're not going to renovate, I still look at that as an opportunity to prepare your turf for, kind of crossing the finish line coming in through the end of August and towards Labor Day. So, if you're in a renovation situation, obviously you have a chance to change, more than just, adding some extra inputs or doing some different things. You're talking about turf types and cultivar choices, soil prep and remediation, all that type of stuff. But there's also steps you can take too on just a regular maintenance situation and get yourself prepared. So that's kind of a talk for probably down the road, but I think that's a really, really important distinction to look at. Typically we look at that calendar in a chronological format or linear format of, okay, we come out of winter into spring, we go from spring into summer, grass looks a little worse, then fall, and then we hit the finish line, Thanksgiving time or something like that. And I think it's kind of the other way around, where fall is really our start, and that's where we need to kind of make sure that we've got our ducks in a row. So, and that can be tough too. It can be tough, after a summer like this one in particular, where you feel like you're getting your butt kicked every day out there moving sprinklers around, or wondering what you should do next. As far as whether it be a fertilizer treatment, shouldn't I spray those weeds out now, or should I wait? Those are the same questions that even pros are asking themselves too, to try and time that stuff up right. So
yeah, and that's where that's kind of been my whole thing all along, with really focusing on fall, because I just have seen such a great response from that the next seasons. You're focused. It's also a little easier as things are cooling, obviously, that you're not getting so much growth as you are in the spring when things are trending the opposite direction. So it's just so much easier, and it's much nicer to be out there when the weather's a little cooler, and it's just I love the fall season. But
no, I agree, and I think that's some of the best time to do meaningful work. That's where the heavy lifting comes in, and I think I've seen that in your content over the years, that you've really put a lot of work into the renovations and stuff like that, and I think you've really championed those efforts too, of people trying to get out there in the fall and make sure things are prepped. By the time you get into spring and you've got that that spring flush, that's defense time. That's the time to kind of back off and just let's maintain and do the little things right, and trust that our heavy lifting and our prep work has been good. So, that is sort of that curve. So we talk about, well, why is it like that? Well, temperatures being what they are, going through this period, it's a really critical period. And so I want to go to this next slide here. Let me pop it up.
Yeah, and this is something too related to that, but I think some people may have the misconception a bit that the temperatures don't get quite as warm as they actually do through some of our areas. Even back when I lived in Minnesota, there's still plenty of heat during the summertime. You have to be really far north in order to get away from some of that. So
yeah, and heat's an important distinction there. But the other thing is too, understand that when you see that temperature that's reported, from the airport or on the Weather Channel or something like that, if it's been set, if the weather station's been set correctly, that's going to be a temperature in the shade, right? So you can expect this time of year your surface temperatures in full sun to be anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees higher. So that's that much warmth, energy, all that type of stuff that's hitting your grass, hitting the soil, and causing some of the summer stress, whether it be through evaporation of water out of the soil, through degradation of chlorophyll and other parts of the plant. and issues like that. So there's a number of different issues that kind of goes into this whole summer decline. That's why they sort of came up with this catch-all term that, you know, it feels good to say, but when you go out and look at it in person, you're just like, oh man, that's rough. Yeah. So so this slide here, you know, if you look at we talk about the two main processes that govern plant life in general. Okay, so this isn't just grass, this is plant life in general. So the two main processes, photosynthesis and respiration. Okay, I'm not going to try and get into, you know, biology 101 here. This isn't your 8 a.m. lab and, you know, freshman year of college, I promise you. But it's an important thing to understand how plants, one, make their food, which is photosynthesis, and how they consume their food and turn it into energy, which is respiration, right? So the really important thing to look at here, you've got temperatures going across the x-axis here on the bottom. You've got relative respiration, so how much, you know, food or energy is being used and made and used throughout the plant during these different cycles, right, and different temperature regimes. So as we get up, and we talked about 75 air temperature is sort of the top end of optimum for cool season. Well, look what happens. The respiration curve crosses over the photosynthesis curve. Photosynthesis takes a dive, respiration stays the same. So think of this as, you know, basically we can make more food below 75 than we can consume, right? We can go to, you know, if this plant is, you know, Ryan Knorr out there in Iowa, you can go to the grocery store and buy more food than you can eat, right? Now, when it gets above 75, though, you get really hungry, and your want to of going to the store is severely diminished past 75 degrees, right? So what this turns into in a plant sense is once we get above 75, we're starting to eat away at carbohydrate reserves, and those are stored in the roots, right? And so once we get through all that, once we go through extended periods where we're above 75 and we've got more coming out than going in, essentially. You know, we've got more food and energy that's going out of the plant and being consumed by the plant than we are able to produce, right? That's the danger zone, right? Because we're losing root system, and at some point there's nothing left to give on the root system, and at that point we start losing plant tissue. So those are stems, crowns, leaves, all that kind of stuff is what starts failing, and that's when we have plant failure. So this is exactly what's happening, and why you see what you're seeing out there right now in these tough conditions. Now again, there's nothing we can do to change the physiology of the plant such that, hey, above 75 up until, you know, whatever number, 80, 85, you're still going to be happy. There's things you can do with cultivar selection, stuff like that, but that's a deeper topic for another time. But there's definitely management things, techniques, strategies, and tactics that you can do to help limit the exposure of the plant in terms of the environmental stresses that it's going through. And that's some of what we can talk about here a little bit today. But
yeah, and I think that's really right where we're at right now, because I've been seeing a lot of comments from people who I think probably they're trying their best to water, they're trying to keep everything going, but it gets to a point, especially here. I actually saw a comment from someone yesterday, and I can't remember his exact location, but he said he had like about 0.2 of an inch in 5 weeks. And he was like, I'm trying, but I don't know what to do anymore. And I think we're bordering on now 3 weeks of nothing more than just that little shower that we had. So, I mean, at that point, you're getting to what else can I do? Can I even keep up? And that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's where you're right. It's the same thing over here where folks are sort of struggling to find where their footing is. You know, as far as, okay, what can I really lean on in a period that, okay, it's hot. And again, that's a really, we talk about all those factors of weather, right? And it goes back to, you know, what should we be targeting as far as watering goes? And it's not just temperature. I mean, that's sort of what I hear a lot of too, from homeowners and from folks that are just getting started with really trying to embrace and understand lawn care is, well, it's hot, I need to water. Okay, well, temperature is only one thing that I would be looking at as a pro and advising even, somebody at the most basic level on how to water. So there's other components too. Would be one, you can look at either dew point or relative humidity. So how dry is the air essentially? The other thing to look at would be wind, and it's probably a little bit more of an issue, I think, out in your area in the plains, that you get those dry 90 plus degree windy days. That's danger zone right there for grass for sure. And then the other thing too is sunlight. So if it's a little bit more cloudy, that partly to mostly cloudy thing, and most of the weather apps have gotten pretty good about predicting cloud cover, as a percentage basis. Those are good. Those are good data points to look at and judge on watering. But the real crux of it comes down to, do you know how much water you're putting out when you set up a sprinkler? So whether it's you've got the fanciest automatic irrigation system in the ground that has all the bells and whistles, all the way down to I've got a 50-foot garden hose and a plastic sprinkler from Home Depot. What do we do? You got to understand what the watering requirements are for that grass. And so for you, what do you do? I know you just got an in-ground system, and that's a really important part, but what have you done to kind of dial that stuff in at your place?
Yeah, so that's something that you and I think, have talked about pretty extensively, because it was just something that up until this point, obviously I knew it was very important, but actually learning how to try to figure out how much water is in the soil, how much do I need to add, what is too much, what's too little. So I've just been going out with my soil probe nearly every day, different sections of the yard, pulling out a core, trying to see where's the moisture level, am I returning the amount of water I need to when I do water, and what level is that reaching. I think last year I was probably just over watering a lot of things. Like once it got hot in my mind, I just thought, put more water on it. But then it had fungus. There's lots of, more water isn't necessarily better depending on your, especially my climate at night where it's over 70.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that's part of it too, is you've got to be able to, understand what the watering requirements are based on weather, but then too, the most basic thing is understand what your output is. So I can't remember if you've covered it in any of your videos, but even the simplest thing is basically just going out with a tuna can, something that's a low slided container that you can put out there for the longer the time period, the more accurate it's going to be. But say a half an hour to an hour, let it run and understand what that depth, that precipitation rate is. Yep. People always talk about, I water.
I've got one of those little yellow, I don't know, you've seen the little rain gauges that you can kind of stick down into the turf. Those are nice to have too.
Yeah, exactly. Something like that is
Yep.
is a really, really good piece to have. But then you go up and, you look at different things where folks will say, well, I watered this for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Okay, well, think about it when you watch the weather on the news. Nobody tells you, well, today it's going to rain for an hour, or today it's going to rain for 85 minutes. Like, nobody does that, right? All that is reported in, how many inches of rain do we get? How many inches of precipitation do we get? So that's how you need to be basing all your irrigation decisions off of, is if I know that, if I put about a half an inch of water down, my soil gets to about this feel, like you were saying, using a soil moisture probe, just to stick in the ground, pull out a core, look at it, rub it, feel it, and see how it feels. Now, there's more precise ways of doing it, and again, that's a whole deeper dive, but even just sticking a pocket knife in and kind of having a feel for, okay, hey, this feels like it's where it should be. I can pull the knife in, I can pull the knife out pretty easily, and it's not, we don't have soil sticking to it, so I know it's too wet, or it's not impossible, to penetrate the soil surface, or where it's too dry. You can water based off feel and get pretty close. And that's really where I think, again, understanding of, okay, well, if I do this and I put out, half an inch of irrigation, this is where I end up at, water-wise. So that's a really important thing to understand what's coming out of your, whatever it is, hose end sprinkler, automatic irrigation, doesn't matter. You got to understand. And to that point too, if you do have automatic irrigation, Don't just trust that everything's the same. If you've got 3, 4, 5, 10 zones, whatever it is, take the time and sample all those and understand if there's any areas where the coverage might be poor and you might have to bump up a runtime, or where you have almost too much coverage and it's getting a little wet if you're watering everything the same. So consistency doesn't always mean that everything's the same across the board.
I have a couple of zones where I have to watch a little bit because it's not exactly perfect. You think, oh, everything's going to be watered the same. I put 30 minutes on this and I put 30 minutes on the next one, but they don't. The coverage of everything can be a little different, the way the land lays too and stuff. So
exactly, yeah, that's another thing too, is just terrain, grades, all those types of things, super important to consider. And then also rainfall too, is measuring rainfall. Is that, well, it rained last night, the pavement's wet, how much do we get? So just again, like you said, that $5 or $10 investment of a decent rain gauge is so worth it, because it could save you from throwing water down, for an extra night or something like that. So, but to your point, or in the original opening there, being on the dry side is going to save you more times than it is being on the wet side. That's for sure. And there's reasons for that too, as far as the physiology of the plant, not just the fungus issue and that sort of thing, but also too just the ability for the plant, that respiration process that we talked about previously, that relies on the roots taking up oxygen out of the soil. So if there's too much water in that soil, it's impossible for the plant to take up enough oxygen. And so that's another way that you can have plant failure, and going through a situation where, oh man, it's hot, so I'm just going to bomb the water out there. I'm going to just throw 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 minutes at it, and that should take care of cooling it off. And it's like, well, you can do that, but what other issues are you exacerbating or creating by doing that? And so that's the real, if you're really going to get down to the crux of managing through heat stress in the hottest times of the year, it's almost, how does the decision that you do make influence all the other parts of that system, and go through it. So yeah, it's an interesting prospect. I wish I could make it easy for everybody and just say, yep, 30 minutes every other night, set it and forget it, and you're good. And you might hear a lot of that on YouTube and from other sources and things like that, but if you do the work on your lawn and understanding your situation, you're going to be way better off than just taking a general kind of rule of thumb advice and going with that.
Yep. And I feel like I've been, like I said, much better off this year. I've actually been putting less water on than really, I would think I would need, but it's been working. Things have been staying green, and I'm like, just gonna keep going with what I got until I learn otherwise and find some other issue. But right now, that's kind of what I've been doing. So in terms of that, let's say someone is worried about, or they have already a fungus issue. This is something I've seen a couple times recently, where someone has some brown patch going on or something, and they're like, well, I still need to water because otherwise everything's going to kind of check out. What should I do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how widespread it is, and I think that's the key, is if you're going to treat it actively and try and knock it down, so let's say it is brown patch and you want to make a fungicide application, then I feel okay about watering, but again, erring on the dry side of things to do that. If you don't treat it and it's still out there and you still have conditions that are favorable, then you're just rolling the dice. And that's, again, it's that decision. Do I spray a fungicide or do I not spray a fungicide? Well, that might come down to money or time or, a variety of other things. Okay, well, if I chose not to, it's just kind of like going down a flow chart, and it really comes down to, what am I willing to accept as what could be a possible outcome of this situation. And if it's, I'm not going to spray because I don't want to spend the money on fungicide, and I'm still going to water because I have enough good grass out here that I feel like I want to try and save, and you get down and it's going to say, that little box is going to say, well, you might have less grass than you started with today when you made this decision, but this might be for the best to try and get through it. So you still could lose grass, absolutely. And I think that's, one thing that it's hard to be able to lay all those decisions out real simple and easy for everybody, because every situation is different. But, that's where you use your resources and ask for help. And I think, you've always had I think offered good support to your community and your subscribers here for sure. And I think there's other outlets that those folks can go to as well to try and seek out that information. So I think that's an important
And I think
part.
that also people might need to think more in their head a little bit too of it's okay to let things dry out a little bit if that's what you have to do. Like, I mean, I've done it many times. Right now I'm doing it on a section behind my fence there out towards the creek. I'm just kind of letting it be what it is. I just don't have coverage out there, and it's okay. Like, it doesn't look perfect. It doesn't look as good as everything else, but is it going to come back in the fall? Yeah, it's going to be fine.
Exactly, and that's I think that's two important things that you just said right there. The first is defining your expectations, and if your expectations are to have an emerald green lawn, 45 weeks of the year in a Midwestern climate, my gosh, I hope that you have an inheritance to rely on, or that you are a very good lottery number guesser, whatever. To say that, hey, there's going to be times where this looks good and this doesn't, and you sort of learn that and you understand that as you go through over the years on a property, whether it be a home that you own or a golf course or whatever. I mean, that's just sort of the things that you learn how to ebb and flow. The other point there too is about turf being wet versus dry, and I think an important distinction there is when they're breeding turf now, even if it's like the contractor mixes and stuff that you'd see a little bit higher grade at a sod farm, or like the top end super elites type stuff that you and some of your community and subscribers would be using, those are all bred to dry down. Like when they are breeding those in the field and selecting those varieties, part of that research is for them to dry the absolute crap out of them to where you wouldn't want to smoke a cigarette within 20 feet of it. And that to me just shows that hey, these grasses can perform pretty well under minimal irrigation. That's what they're there to do, right? And also too, the recuperative potential. I mean, a lot of times what you see on these newer varieties is if you do dry them out and then they get some rain or they get a significant irrigation event to follow up and kind of snap them back, they're pretty quick to come right back. You don't see a whole lot of lingering effects of just straight dry down effects. So yeah, that's a really important distinction too, is that it's okay to be dry. Don't feel compelled to always water your way out of something, just as you can't spray or spread your way out of something. So,
and just a little quick thing as I'm sitting here looking at this, but I got this little thing of Bermuda here actually in this little cup. So don't think also that if you've got some warm season that you can't get it toasted, because I actually left this outside for a couple days and forgot to water, and it's looking pretty tough. So
yeah, and that's again, like if you look at these plant breeders and what they do, it is truly amazing the rigors that they put these cultivars through to make sure that they can perform like that, because they understand too that they don't want their stuff to look bad out there, and they understand that drought happens, and that a lot of that grass and most likely will end up in unirrigated situations at whatever level it is. And that's an important thing for them too when they're breeding, is something that can get through those stresses. So
in terms of anything then that, let's say people have been watering or they're doing their best, they're trying to come up with any strategies, is there anything else really that they can kind of do? Some people talk about syringing, some people talk about some biostimulants or wetting agents, or we don't have to dive into all of that stuff because that's really a deep topic, but just general things maybe on the surface that they could start to research. Or
so general things, how stress manifests when you're in that respiration phase above what your plant can make, right? A lot of what you see is basically proteins inside the plant start kind of unfolding and unraveling, and that's where bad stuff starts to happen. That's where you start to see tissue failure, whether it be in the roots, it be in the leaves, so on and so forth. So on the biostimulant side, you look at a couple of different things. If you're on a biostimulant program, you need to be careful, so let's just say like a seaweed extract that's going to have a balance of cytokinins and auxins in it. Auxins are for root growth, cytokinins are for tissue and shoot growth. So forcing some of that stuff in there during times of high heat, it can help in small amounts. And I think what I always tell people is back down your rates, tighten up your frequencies, and watch the weather, right? So if you try to go out there and slam out a high rate of, let's just say it's 2 ounces every 3 weeks, go at 1 ounce and go, every 10 days and back that down a little bit and watch that weather to see if it pumps back up. On the wetting agent side, I think you got to watch your soil, and if you know that you have soil that is very, very difficult to get water into, there's a variety of reasons why that happens physically within the soil, both from a structural standpoint and a chemical standpoint. Trying out wetting agents, I think, should be more on the table for a lot of folks. There's a bunch of different ones that get pushed towards homeowners, especially in the YouTube market that I've seen. Here's the bottom line is, even on the top 100 golf courses, the best golf courses in the world, they're trying and swapping different things out all the time because what works on one course in their greens or their fairways or whatever, if you go next door, less than a mile down the road, that same product might not work the same way at that place. So, that's a really different thing where I think it's important to kind of look at other products and sort of examine what might be best for you. So that's a whole deep dive video that don't have enough time to talk about. But the basics too of potassium. That's another one that if there's potassium in the soil, the plant's going to get it out pretty effectively. Under stress, it's not going to get it out as effectively. Without irrigation or water, it's not going to get in there very effectively. So there's two very important things there real quick. One, K enters the plant the same as nitrogen. It's a process called mass flow. So when the plant demands water from the roots, nitrogen and K fix and they go up into the water, and that's how it gets in the plant, generally speaking. Now you can spray potassium, and this is kind of what we talk about with some of the new products that are being marketed in the lawn care segment, like potassium acetate, things like that. Those are very, very high foliar uptake products, but we're talking about soil. So those applications are beneficial if you can get them in the plant. So whether it's through a foliar means, through the summer using like a potassium acetate type product, or if you know that you can get your soil right. And again, this is where that fall renovation or kind of the kickoff to the next season starts. Really working on that potassium level is an important thing. And the reason why, the things that open and close in the plant leaf, this is another kind of physiology thing that we could talk about in morphology, parts of the plant, where these plant parts called stomata. They're basically like a window. So if you have a window in your house, and you can imagine when the plant is normally respiring and able to release water and basically sweat almost, you got the window open, the stomata is open, okay? And then when we get into a period where, it's starting to dry down, humidity's lowering, things like that, the plant needs to conserve water, it actually has a mechanism inside that knows, hey, I need to shut the window and try to preserve all the water that's in this plant, which includes, 80 to 85% of water that makes up the actual leaf blade in the grass system. Yeah, it's a thing where we've got multiple different things at play, and I think that's where, again, the potassium level in your soil is definitely something that it's often overlooked and not looked at for heat stress enough, and it gets oversold a little bit on heat stress, but you've got a real opportunity there to improve that, coming into fall and then into spring to make sure you're set there, and then use foliar applications to supplement in times of high stress. So
that's what I think has helped me the most in the last year I was doing it some, but also this year really focusing my foliar applications before all of the stress came in, and then during the stress I think has really helped a lot too. All right, so just to follow up then on, we talked a little bit about biostims and wetting agents, and how about that syringing part or anything you can do, maybe cooling the plant? Does it do anything? Does it not?
So it definitely does, but again, under those right weather conditions. So again, looking at wind, looking at relative humidity, temperature, and cloud cover. Okay, and here's where it does work, here's where it doesn't work. Say high humidity, low wind, high temperature. When you syringe your grass, whether it's with a hose or whether it's with a sprinkler or an in-ground system, whatever, that cooling effect is going to be lasts for somewhere around maybe like 3 to 5 minutes, and then it's gone. Just because there's so much heat trapped in the air, and again, moist air is going to hold heat longer. Moist soil is going to hold heat longer. So that's where it just kind of comes down to, you're not going to be very effective with that, and also too, might exacerbate a fungus issue if you do have it at that time. So a time where it would work would be, few clouds, low humidity, and or wind, and hot temperatures. And even if you don't have hot temperatures, that's the other thing too, it's kind of a fallacy. If I've got say a 78 degree day, and I've got sun high in the sky, and I've got a pretty good breeze and low humidity, just because it's not hot, just because it's comfortable for me, doesn't mean it's not comfortable for the grass, or it is comfortable for the grass, I should say. Those are times where I would be syringing, probably even more so than, say, a 92 degree day where it's very, very humid and uncomfortable outside. I would tend to, in those situations especially, try to get your base moisture in as early in the morning as you can, right around dawn, so 4, 5, 6 a.m. if you can target that. If you have automatic, if you don't, buy a battery valve for your hose spigot, something like that if you can. And then by 9, 10 a.m., have that stuff off and just let it ride. Let it ride. If you do have a really tough spot that maybe, you're throwing some seed down, or is struggling kind of going into it, pick up the hose, put the nozzle on it, and go out there and hand water it. And I think that's one thing that's undersold too, is, trying to be very, very site specific with your irrigation when you're in stress periods. So again, hot, humid, hot, dry. Don't be afraid to just roll the hose out there and water a spot the size of a shoebox if you're really committed to keeping it.
Yep, I do that. I do that all the time with edges of my driveway and stuff, especially because I just come out there, and really hose down certain little spots, and it is what it is. I'm sure everybody adds to my, what is this crazy dude doing again?
That's okay. That's okay. Well, and that sounds like a great candidate for some drip irrigation along the driveway. See?
I know.
See?
I know.
There's always something more to do, Ryan. Always something more to do.
I know, and that is a great point on the humidity level, because I have seen that so much during fall time, or even maybe early spring or early summer, where that humidity hasn't hit yet quite like it does during July and August here, but those are some dry days there where you could just feel it, like it sucks so much water out of the soil that day. So
that's a whole, I'll kind of preface it, and maybe we can talk about it in the future, is that's a process known as evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration, also abbreviated as ET. And this is not the movie from 1982, which is very sad at the end. I don't want to talk about it because it's going to get dusty in here. I don't want to do it. But ET with grass, well, it's a good thing in that it's a quantifiable measure, right, of how much water is coming out of the soil. And real quick, I'll kind of get into, think of that soil like a glass of water, okay? And on a hot, dry day, let's say there's 3 inches of water in the glass. On a really dry day, about 10% of that might go away, okay? On a really humid day, that might only be like maybe 1%, maybe not even. Now, it might have been hotter on the day where only like 1% of it went out, but again, that was irrelevant. It was about how much water went out. And again, those are factors of wind, sunlight, relative humidity. And so that's a really, really important thing, is if you can look up and have good ET data, and there's a lot of college, like land-grant universities here in the Midwest that have good weather stations. It's not going to be like, a personal weather station on Wonderground around the block from your house, but it'll at least give you an idea. And just sort of like maybe a red line, if you will, is here in the Midwest, if I saw a day that was 0.3 inches of ET, like 0.3 of an inch of water coming out of the soil, that would be a lot. So it's different in the desert Southwest or in, Florida, all that kind of stuff. It kind of varies as far as what that red line limit is, but here in the Midwest, I'd say 0.3 inches.
I think that kind of hit me a little bit the one time last year. I was talking to Rick at Des Moines Golf, and he said, "Oh, I wish it were a little more humid right now. I would prefer it to be more humid." And I was kind of thinking in my head, like, I don't like humidity at all. This isn't fun. And then I got to thinking, oh yeah, I do see the benefit sometimes. I mean, it being extremely dry is not always the best thing either.
Yeah, and it's a balance, right? So we see it here, all the time with our weather patterns, right? So it gets super humid, a cold front comes through, get a bunch, you might get some rain, you might not get any, and then it cools down, it dries out a little bit as far as humidity goes, and then it just sort of kind of goes in that cycle, it seems like. And so playing that wave of high and low pressure and humidity and all that kind of stuff, that's a really, really important piece of managing turf through these periods here in the summertime, especially. So in the Midwest anyway.
So I'd say, kind of to wrap things up here, the forecast looks like it's still going to be pretty hot coming up, and as far as surviving everything, till you get to renovation season, is there any last advice you'd have for people? We've already talked about kind of the strategies and things, but anything there that you just think, if they're really struggling, should they let it go? What should they do?
Well, here's the thing is, again, you could spend a lot of time, money, and heartache, and the horses are already out of the barn, so to speak, right? It's already hot, your turf's already stressed, and, truthfully, in looking at the upcoming weather forecast, there's not going to be a ton of opportunity for recovery in this period. So you manage the best you can, realize that less is more. So less water, less fertilizer, less biostimulants, less all that kind of stuff, and take this as an opportunity to do a couple of things. And one is learn your turf, learn your property. So understand where those trigger points are. Hey, you know what? Every time it gets really hot and humid, I get some type of disease. Maybe I don't even know what it is, but I get some type of disease. Oh, right over here on the corner of the house by that dogwood tree in the shade. Every time. So you maybe write that down, you file it away, and that's your trigger spot. So next year when you're starting to look for disease or starts ramping up, you better believe you're going to be out there every morning looking at that spot and knowing, hey, if it starts here, that means it's going to spread and I've got to be on top of it. Or, using those things as trigger points. So learning your property now in a tough time is a really, really important thing, especially if you know you're going to be in your home for a while and manage that piece of property for a long time. This is good practice to learn those types of things, right? And then the other part is, whether you're doing a renovation, you're going to kill everything off and start over, you're going to make some other big change. You're going to add an irrigation system or do a new landscape feature that's going to change your yard or tear things up, or you're just going to say, hey, you know what, I lost enough grass this year that I'm going to overseed. All those situations, it's a great time to prepare now. And Ryan, you can attest to this. I mean, I think you're probably one of the most planned out and prepared guys I've seen on this side of the lawn care industry. But just as well as I do, high-end seed doesn't just sit on the shelf at Home Depot or sit in a van at Amazon Prime ready to come out to you. You've got to source this stuff, find it, locate it, make sure that you have access to all of it first at what you consider a fair price and be ready. But beyond that, there's also soil testing stuff that you can do to figure out some of the remedial applications that you might need to make, and start making those now. Eradicate tough to control weeds. So again, there's a lot of different things that you could be doing to set yourself up again for the starting line. If you're like me, you're looking at this and saying, okay, hey, we get to Labor Day, and that's the finish line on what I consider the 2019-2020 growing season for grass. And we're going to kick off and start again the Tuesday after Labor Day and get ready for the 2020-2021 season. And that's a really, really important thing. So use this time wisely.
That's great advice, for sure, because you are right that finding that seed or even preparing your renovation stuff, all of a sudden it catches up with you like that. And it's like, you've got to have that stuff ready to go, or all of a sudden you're into a period where you plant too late, frost comes, all this hard work that you did and things. It's just like, start preparing way earlier than you think you should.
Yeah, it's not something you throw together in a weekend and pull it out of your rear end. Like it takes planning, it takes a schedule. and sticking to it and adapting and all that kind of stuff. So it's really important. And last thing too is just identifying resources. So again, we talked about certain members, here in the YouTube and the lawn forum community that I think are always, willing to help. I think that understanding where those resources are and being able to reach out, but there's other ones too. So find somebody to lean on, find people that have been through it, and pick their brain as much as they'll let you, and that'll help out too.
Yep. Okay, well, I think that was so much that we just covered on a lot of things, which so much we also need to dive into a lot more. So hopefully we can do this maybe a little more regularly. I think it's going to be kind of fun to sit down and talk about some things as they happen
Absolutely.
during the year and all of that stuff. But is there anything, Ryan, that people can go check out as far as what you're doing or socials and all that stuff?
Yeah. If you want to check out my latest sports field project, you can follow me at Field Source Ohio on Twitter. I don't get into any of the other platforms. All the turf guys and so forth are on the Twitter platform. So at Field Source Ohio, you'll find me there. My website, www.fieldsourceohio.com. And check us out. We're always here to help anybody outside of sports fields as well. But really appreciate the opportunity, Ryan, and it's been awesome to chat.
Yeah, hopefully we can actually meet up in person here sooner rather than later, and that'd be fun. So we'll try to get that done too. But
awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to the turf field trip from Ryan Knorr. So.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
All right. Well, hey, I really appreciate it again, and looking forward to it here in the near future. Okay.
Thanks for chatting.
All right. You as well.